Welcome to Confessions of an EOS Implementer, a podcast by Talent Harbor. We share unique stories of EOS implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and the challenges of the system in action. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. Let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of Confessions of an EOS Implementer, brought to you by Talent Harbor. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Rip Tilden, a distinguished business leader and executive coach with 5 decades, his confession, not mine, of leadership experience across a variety of industries. His career has seen him transform from a COO at a publicly traded company to a mentor, a coach, a consultant, and an EOS implementer who has guided over 80 companies through the intricacies of EOS implementation. Known for his strategic acumen and deep commitment to fostering effective teams, Rip actually co-authored Leading on Purpose, Sage Advice and Practical Tools for Becoming the Complete Leader, which offers practical tool set for achieving excellence in leadership roles. We had an incredible conversation around what it takes to be a great leader, how great leaders are made and not born, and the meaning of strategy and the differences in the execution of strategy between public and private companies. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. All right. So Rip, your career, your background is incredible. And there's like this natural progression, like all the way to a COO of a publicly traded company. I am sure you have seen a lot. Is there like one instance or one experience that kind of solidified this path that you were on that took you through all of this progression?
Probably not one, but there are a few mileposts along the way that come to mind. When I started my career, and keep in mind, it was when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I'm literally in my 50th year of my working life. So if I could convince people that I started working at age 10, I would prefer to do that, but I can't. So people can do the math and figure out that I'm 70. In any case, I started out with the assumption that I wanted to build a career in big corporations. That's what attracted me when I was in college. And so I started there. I started in large companies with big divisions and global headquarters and all that kind of stuff, and had a bunch of staff jobs in larger companies, working my way up in those staff organizations. But I soon decided that I really wanted to move from staff jobs to operations jobs because I wanted to be in the game, not observing or supporting the game. That's basically the way I thought about it. So a key milepost for me was the decision to get an MBA. Several years into my working life, I decided to go to the University of Chicago to get a master's in business administration because I didn't have that academic background in my undergraduate years. My undergraduate years were liberal arts, small college, general education. MBA made a world of difference. I went to the University of Chicago in the 80s at a time when it was the ultimate free market school. I had the wonderful blessing of having as professors 6 Nobel laureates in economics and accounting and finance. And it was a great, great time to be there. So that transformed my mindset. I began to think of myself as a more general management kind of person. Stayed in large corporate for a while, but eventually I got very tired of the bureaucracy of big companies. And I began to migrate towards smaller businesses where I had more senior positions because I was coming from large companies where I had mid-level jobs and moved into smaller companies where I had somewhat more senior positions. And eventually got to a point where I was, as you pointed out, the COO of a technology company in Philadelphia. I served in that capacity for about 5 years. I was at the company for 10. COO for the last 5 I was there, NASDAQ traded company, and a great experience. I was the day-to-day boss of the company, if you will. The CEO was the visionary. So if you put it in EOS terms, the CEO was the visionary, I was the integrator, and loved it. And he and I got along great, wonderful experience. The next milepost was a change in legislation because the company was a publicly traded company. And in the early 2000s, Congress passed a series of laws generally labeled Sarbanes-Oxley. And what that was in response to bad acts by some executives at some companies having to do with the way in which they reported their performance and their results. So Sarbanes-Oxley was a set of laws requiring companies to have double layers of auditors. So you had an auditing company, a public accounting firm usually, and then another firm to audit their audit. And what that meant for senior executives was you had your hands tied with regards to the flexibility to run the company. And you had your hands tied with regards to your ability to build and harvest wealth. And it really wasn't very much fun anymore. And so I decided to leave public companies. And I went into private companies, next watershed moment, small private companies where I had senior roles and enjoyed that. But all during this time, I had been thinking about building a consulting practice. Very early in my career, I'd been with a large consulting firm for a short period of time and decided finally I want to do that. I've run companies. I've had lots of people reporting to me. I've scratched that itch. I really want to help other companies in a consulting capacity. And it was at that time that I learned serendipitously. I hadn't known this before I made the decision to consult. But shortly after I made the decision, I learned about EOS, which, as you know, is the entrepreneurial operating system. And at the time, there were very few EOS implementers. I think I was somewhere in the 15th to 20th implementer. I don't know the exact number, but it was early in the EOS worldwide life in 2009. And I fell in love with that. And I've been doing that ever since. I've also been doing one other thing that's a complementary practice area, and that is leadership training. I have a business partner. He and I published a book in 2014 called Leading on Purpose, which contains the content of the leadership training that we teach leadership teams of small and medium-sized companies all over the country. So our consulting practice is in two parts: helping leadership teams of entrepreneurial businesses get what they want out of their business by helping them implement EOS, and helping leadership teams of small and medium-sized companies strengthen their leadership effectiveness. And we learned very early on that what we were teaching in our leadership training is quite complementary to what we teach in EOS. There's no dissonance with regards to the philosophy of our leadership training versus the leadership training that's built into EOS. And so it's been a fun 15 years because we've been able to work with a lot of small companies, have a blast, have a lot of laughs, help them deal with tough issues, learn as we've gone along. I'm always learning, and that's been a heck of a lot of fun. So it's been last 15 years, from age 55 to 70, has been the most fun of my professional life. I had fun in other stages, but this has been a blast. And so it's energizing, and that's why I'm still at it. That's why I haven't, fully retired. I'm still working with clients because they're still inviting me into the room. And that's a real privilege. That's an honor to be invited into the room.
First off, you look great for 70, and I wouldn't put your age out there, but you said it, so I'll just double down on that.
Right on cue, and I'll send you that check, I promise.
So think back to before the Sarbanes-Oxley, and you're sitting in this COO role, and some of the things that you were dealing with there, like how different, I mean, obviously it's a lot different, but like, what are those kind of key things of leading in the integrator position at a publicly traded company versus going to private, and not necessarily the size, but what are some of those other things that are like either constraints or headaches or challenges to overcome?
Well, some are similarities with smaller private companies and some are not. And this list won't surprise anybody that's been in both worlds. As it relates to differences, which is where your question started, and then I'll talk about similarities. Biggest difference in a public company is the public reporting requirement. The law requires that you report on a quarterly basis your financial performance. And there's a good reason for that. Investors, stockholders, need to know how the company's doing. They need a full disclosure of the company's performance and what the issues are, so they not only understand past performance, they have a realistic set of expectations for future performance, and therefore can make their own investment decisions about whether they want to still own the company or not. And when I say own the company, I mean as a shareholder among many. So the public quarterly reporting requirement really affects your management thinking, because ultimately you find that you are often in a tension between long-term strategic moves you may want to make with the company and the need to continuously report improving, if at all possible, quarterly performance. It's not always possible to do that, but you still have the reporting requirement. So at the end of the day, there's tension in public companies between the desire on the part of investors to see pretty steady quarterly progress and the desire on the part of not only management team members, but investors as well, to make strategic decisions that may not lead to near-term improved results. You may have to invest in new technology or acquire a company or expand your markets geographically or offer new products, and that may cost you some money, which will hurt your financial performance in the near term. So the demand on you as a manager in that world is to do a very, very good job of explaining that to the investment community. That doesn't mean they will never accept those investments. It just means they need to understand the rationale for them and what the expectations should be once those investments begin to pay off. How long do we have to wait for a return? What should the return be, et cetera? Easy to describe in a conversation like this, Ryan, but very difficult to get right when you're on a quarterly earnings call, because things change, stuff happens. And some investors are patient with that and some are not. In the private company world, you are more likely, not guaranteed by any means, but you are more likely to encounter somewhat more patient capital. That is to say, investors who are willing to wait a little longer for a return. They're willing to try some risks, especially if they're entrepreneurs. They're willing to try some risks that they might not try in a public company. So that may be the most significant difference in the management perspective that you have to adopt when you're running a public company versus running a private or assisting a private company. The similarities won't surprise you. Strategic decisions still need to get made with clarity of thinking and clarity of information. You really do have to think clearly about what's happening in our market. What do our customers want? Are we able to deliver that? What do we need to do to anticipate what they're going to need? And how do we deliver superior value in the face of competition? By the way, that last phrase is the most wonderful definition of strategy I've ever come across. And it's not mine. It's from Michael Porter, one of the great professors at the Harvard Business School. In his book on strategy, he defined strategy very simply. How will you, as a management team, deliver superior value in the face of competition? And what that really means is, how are you going to deploy resources to deliver a superior return for the owners of the company in a competitive marketplace? That thinking applies whether you're in a public or private company, but the length of time investors are willing to wait is often different. I hope that every company, public or private, has people challenges and all the other things that go with managing an enterprise of human beings. But that big difference is one I would cite.
You covered that incredibly well, because my follow-on question would have been, what is the difference between the companies that are able to manage that tension better than the ones that aren't? And what you just said is clear communication to the investors to create that patience and build that runway to be able to let some of these initiatives percolate.
I will also add, you have to have clear-headed thinking about the strategic decisions that you make. It's essential you communicate it well, but you also have to make the right call.
That's a good point. Maybe a track record to gain some trust and credibility along the way goes a long way.
That helps.
You talked about strategy, and when you think about strategy and you think about EOS, I've heard differing opinions here, which is there's kind of one school of thought where EOS is an amazing framework for managing and operating the business, but there's kind of a separate exercise that needs to be conducted to really look at strategy. I've also heard that strategy is fundamentally built into the framework by the exercises that you complete. So when you think about that amazing quote and like what strategy is and how strategy is defined, how do you think about strategy as it pertains to the EOS framework?
Well, I love what I learned early on as an implementer, and that is that the strategic component of EOS, which is built into the leadership team's definition of their vision for the business. And you may recall that when we define our vision in EOS, we answer 8 questions, starting with what are the core values of the enterprise, which isn't where do we want to be long term. That comes in as the third question. We start with core values. What's the culture we want to define and build? Then our core focus, which is our strategic filter, what's our purpose in the niche. Then finally, we get to what's the long-term target for the business, which could be a financial target or that plus other components. And then you answer a series of other questions designed to define how you're going to get to that long-term target. Ultimately, that level of strategic dialogue for most entrepreneurial companies is more than adequate. Because first of all, they generally know their markets pretty well. They generally know their competitive position pretty well. And they're close to their customers. They haven't become bureaucratic, sclerotic organizations that have lost touch. And so the strategic dialogue that takes place in defining the vision is usually, for the great majority of entrepreneurial businesses who implement EOS, absolutely fine. So that's a strategic dialogue, but it isn't a deep dive on competitive analysis. It's not a deep dive on marketplace dynamics or other things. And it often isn't necessary. I have a subset of my clients, and I guess I've worked with somewhere between 80 and 90 companies to help them implement EOS over the years. There's a subset of them, and it's a small subset, who have a real appetite for digging deeper. A deep dive on what's happening in the market, product trends, technology trends, competitive trends, et cetera. And they do that. And I think that's a great thing. It isn't necessary for the majority of EOS companies I've worked with, but it is for a few. And when they have that appetite, my reaction is have at it. Go do that. It's not officially built into the EOS protocol, but it's not counter to it. It enables those companies to capture more information that they can then fold into the discussion of their vision as they answer the 8 questions I was referring to. So I've answered your question obliquely. Bottom line is EOS has a strategic component, but it's not a deep dive that you would see in a Fortune 500 company because it is necessary. Some companies want to go deeper, and I encourage them to do so, and that becomes raw material for our discussion of the 8 questions that define the vision in EOS.
Got it. And so when you think about that, is that like going deeper, doing like a more comprehensive SWOT analysis of like?
Could be.
Okay, got it.
That could be one component of it. We do SWOT analysis in EOS, but we spend an hour on it at most. Some companies want to really get into an assessment of their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Good for them. If they find it's going to help their thinking, clarify their thinking, by all means do so. But it isn't an official step in the EOS process to go deeper than we go in creating a SWOT in the annual planning session.
Do you see a difference in success level? Do you see a difference in maybe the level of execution or the success rate of strategies for those companies that do go deeper? Or are they just kind of at a different level? They might be slightly larger.
I don't. And by the way, when I think of the companies that, the subset of companies that have gone deeper, in my experience with helping them implement EOS, there isn't a correlation between bigger companies want to go deeper versus smaller companies. Some small companies have, some large companies have decided to do more than just answer the 8 questions in the EOS vision building. And no, I don't see a difference in performance. I can't cite, hey, those 6 or 7 companies that have been clients of mine that have done this deeper dive on strategy have outperformed everybody else. Nope. It really boils down to the discipline with which those companies, whether they go into a deep dive on strategy or not, the discipline they bring to their consistency of purpose in executing the EOS disciplines. Think of it like a weight loss program. If you're going to really lose weight and you really want to do it, then you have to follow whatever program you adopt and stick with it, not just do it occasionally. Same thing goes for EOS companies. If you really want to get full benefit of implementing EOS, follow the disciplines we teach that are brilliantly described in Gino Wickman's book, Traction. Follow those disciplines and stick with them, and you'll get great results. But you have to stick with it over time.
Do you think that's the biggest challenge of implementation is the commitment part, or is there another component that you see that just kind of sometimes takes things off the rails?
Well, I would say the commitment part, my answer would be yes to your question. Is that the biggest challenge? Sure. You got to want to do it. You got to do the hard work and stick with it. When you peel that back, what does the commitment part mean? Well, it means a range of things. Number one, really, truly sticking to your knitting, what you do best. Stick to your core focus. Work towards fulfilling your purpose and playing to your niche. That's the core focus. having the courage to make tough people calls, to really, truly insist that you get the right people in the right seats. But to do that, you also have to have the grace to give them meaningful feedback, your team members meaningful feedback, so that they can grow into their jobs effectively or learn that they're not the right fit for that seat. And then you make a change. So commitment applies, but it applies across a whole range of matters, issues, challenges that require the commitment to be consistent. So I hope that's a helpful answer.
It is. And like we experienced the same thing. So when we started at Hunt to Killer back in 2016, self-implementing, and then probably about 3 or 4 years later, we went out and got an amazing implementer, Margaret Dixon, shout out of Boulder,
great
Colorado.
Lady. Great lady.
Yes. And it was, what was funny is like the company went through 2 transformations. So I was in a Vistage group out here in Seattle. We had an EOS implementer come through, handed out books of traction. The book, I was like, this changed my life. But at the end of the day, like every Friday, it's incredible. But every Friday after a Vistage meeting, like my leadership team was just bracing because they knew that there were ideas galore that were coming after that monthly meeting. And this was kind of the same reception where it was lukewarm, maybe even a little cold, and it took a lot of convincing. And even as we were, I would say probably a year in, like we still didn't have the type of commitment that was needed to make sure that we were all on the same page and we were all managing, thinking, and operating the business the same way. Hey, have you seen different like strategies or tactics that have been used? Maybe it's by the visionary, maybe it's by the integrator, but to help really build that momentum and get that buy-in early on?
An awfully important part of my answer is a willingness on the part of the visionary and the integrator to consistently share the vision for the business that the leadership team builds. It isn't built just by the visionary and the integrator alone, as you know, that the leadership team builds throughout the organization. Now, that's not just the job of the visionary and the integrator, but it needs to start with them. It's the job of every leadership team member to share the vision for the business and to constantly come back to what it is about that vision that excites them, why they believe it's going to be successful, and give team members an opportunity to process it, build it into their own thinking, and frankly, have permission to ask good questions. And when they begin to experience encounters with customers or vendor partners or competitors that may cause them to wonder if every component of the vision is right. So a willingness to have a transparent, open dialogue once you've shared the vision so the team members not only clarify their understanding of it, but also have permission to challenge it is a healthy environment. So that's a key practice on the part of a visionary and an integrator team. Another key part of it is building healthy teams, and that starts with the visionary and integrator. They've got to have a healthy relationship. It's got to be a symbiotic relationship that enables them to play to each other's strengths in defining and pursuing the vision for the business and executing effectively day to day. If they do that well, if their pieces fit together and they treat each other with respect and caring, but also a willingness to challenge each other's thinking without making it personal, what the rest of the team observes is that's the right way to behave in this company in order to succeed, and they will copy that behavior. So that's a second and equally important element of enabling the vision to become real. First, define it well with the leadership team involved, share it consistently, help team members really understand it, give them permission to challenge it, and be open to their challenges because they may well see some things on the front lines with customers that you're not seeing if you're in the visionary seat. And then build a healthy relationship with your most important partner in the business, that's the integrator, and then transmit that behavior by example to the rest of the team. I think those are essential to getting to success for any company implementing EOS.
Is there a time where, because the clear communication and the consistency and the demonstration of the behavior, so setting the example, is there a time where you make the call of, or maybe you make the suggestion of like, all right, time is up or patience is now run out? Like if folks aren't on the team after X or on board with the system or program after X amount of time, like we're starting to think this is more of a people issue than like an EOS framework implementation issue.
Yeah, there is. And the answer is different for each person and each circumstance in a different company. Many of the senior team members that I work with will wring their hands over making a tough call on a team member. And I appreciate that they do. I would never claim that it's an easy thing to do to make a decision to take somebody off a team if they're just not the right fit. I'm going to set aside toxic behavior. I think that's easier to make the call on if somebody's really, truly toxic. But if you've got a team member that just doesn't quite want, or have the capacity to do a particular job, which is how we assess whether they're the right fit for a seat, it's not uncommon for leaders to be a little reluctant to make the call. And so we often will have a conversation around that. What's the right timetable? At the end of the day, it is a judgment call you have to make based upon whether you feel the individual has the potential to grow into a seat and really perform well, get to yes on GWC, get it, want it, capacity to do it, or not. We teach a technique that you're familiar with, I'm sure, that applies in some circumstances, and that's the 3-strike rule. If you have to give somebody the same feedback 3 times, then that's strike 3 and they probably need to go out of that seat. They may or may not be gone from the organization. I don't recommend using that tool for every circumstance, but it's part of the answer that any of the managers I've dealt with will ask. How long do I have to wait for somebody to hit the mark, to perform well? And if they're really, truly not sure how long to wait, I'll ask them, have you thought about using the 3-strike rule? Because if you can give somebody clear feedback and give them the opportunity to change and grow into the job and perform well, and they just can't do it after 3 rounds of feedback, you probably need to make a change.
Got it. Shifting gears just a little bit to the your book, Leading on Purpose, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What are some fundamentals from that book when you think about leadership? Like I'm sure that there are 100 different things in there that makes a good leader great. But what are some of the fundamentals?
There's a set of core principles that we articulate in the front end of the book. And so I'll touch on a couple. First, we truly believe leaders are not born, they are made. There are folks who don't agree with that. They feel there's a certain personality type, there's a certain sort of inner DNA that will make you a good leader. We don't believe that. We believe you can build your leadership skills, build your effectiveness as a leader over time by working at it just like you work at physical conditioning or anything else, any other skill building that you want to do. There are great examples of great leaders who are introverts, great leaders who are extroverts. I don't think it's wired in when you're born. And there's no question that certain environmental inputs as you grow up, and not just to grow up to adulthood, but grow up early in your career, can make a world of difference. But I really, truly believe if you make up your mind you want to be an effective leader, you can build a set of leadership skills by working at them purposefully, hence the title of the book, Leading on Purpose, that will enable you to be a more effective leader than if you just make it a random walk. So that's one key principle. Another key principle is that it is essential for you as a leader to really, truly, passionately be committed to the growth of the people that work for you. This is one area, by the way, that's very consistent with EOS. We really believe, and we say it in the book, that it's essential if you're going to be an effective leader and help others around you grow, you need to really, truly be caring. You need to be passionately committed to their growth and development. Some will grow to a high level in the organization, some will not. But if your team members realize that your principal focus is to help them